Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Welcome to another one of the 2020 Project Orchids videos. This is following a set of orchids divided into four groups throughout a year, following their progress. For those of you who are just joining, and fans come on all morning to do that. It was there. Interrupted now. Shall I start again? No. Yes, so we're in the update 2 round at the moment. This is part 3, the Cattleya types. We've already done parts 1 and 2, leaving part 4 probably sometime next week, and then I can put the whole lot away for another 3 months, and then we'll get it all out and do it all again. So Cattleya types this time round, and 6 plants in all. And we'll have a look at the stills that I took 3 months ago, as what the plants were like at that point in time, have a chat about them as they looked then, and what I was expecting from them in the 3 months that have just gone, which is basically the growing season. So in the main I was expecting things to grow. It's all about stating the obvious. Anyway, we'll look at each of the 6 plants individually as they were 3 months ago, and then a video clip of what they look like now, how well they've done or not, and what I expect from them in the next 3 months. So we're following the progress as we go along. So here we go with part 3, the Cattleya types, or Cattleya Alliance, strictly speaking. So first one up is this. I bought it as Laelia rubescens crossed with Broughtonia negrilensis, but it turns out it's actually registered as Laelonia Joyce Hylton, so I'm using that name now. Doesn't really matter, it's a registered cross, but it's a primary hybrid between 2 types of Cattleyas. When we looked at this at the beginning of the growing season, it was doing just that. It in fact had 6 new growths on it, which for a plant this size was pretty good going. It was almost going to double it in size. Whether it had the strength to push all of those 6 on or not, you know, it was debatable at the start of the year. But nonetheless, you've got 1 off to the left pushing up at the top, 1 in the middle, and then the other 4 off to the right hand side. Not very well showing here. It had grown some roots, didn't have a brilliant root system when I got it, but it had grown some. I wouldn't say it was a brilliant root system at the start of the growing season. I was expecting more. But basically the job of this plant through the growing season was to push those new growths on, hopefully getting them all to mature, with the possibility of blooming on as many of them as possible. But whether the plant would have the strength to bloom on all 6 or not would be good, but not necessarily so. So let's see how this one got on. Okay, so when we last looked at this, we had 6 shiny new growths pushing out at various stages. Obviously the expectation was for possibly some more roots, growing season, and for those 6 new growths to actually mature, with the future hope of all blooming. Now 6 new growths on a plant that size, expecting them all to reach blooming size maturity, was possibly a little bit ambitious, because that is not far off doubling the size of the plant. Well, just putting enough energy into those growths would be good enough, but to be able to get them all to bloom as well remains to be seen. But the new growth out to the left has matured okay, and there is sign of something in the centre there. There's a start of a sheath there. This one in the middle of the plant didn't mature that well. The ones out, I'll have to pick it up, the ones out this side, you've got the 2 smaller ones that were heading out to the right of the plant. One of them's only grown 1 leaf and is a little weak. The one next to it is just about pushing 2 leaves, but not really. The one that came up in the centre of the plant has the 2 light coloured leaves there, the bulb being down in there. That's matured okay. And the one that pushed up the back has also matured okay. So I think we've probably got 3 bulbs that are going to bloom on that. probably no more. Roots haven't extended that much, but I've still got growing tips on some of the roots, so some of them are still progressing. Some of them have decided to bury their heads right inside the cracks. I mean, that one's even found a hole through the bark and come out at the bottom. So we've got a reasonable root system, but again, for the size of the plant, it could do with some more. And a lot of those new roots didn't come out of the new growths, but some of them now are. Those new growths are only just starting to push their roots out. So that's where we are with that. I'm just trying to think. That was actually in bloom when I got it, which was now, this time of year, last year obviously. So it's it got taken out of a pot and put on a mount, and that set it back. It sometimes does, sometimes the plants don't even blink or hiccup, they just carry on. This one stopped, and it stopped for some considerable time. So it's now pushed its blooming season forward in the year. So if this is going to bloom, I suspect it's going to be at, well, minimum of another month and possibly 2. So that pushes it into towards the start of winter, which will mean the temperatures are cooler and the blooms will last longer. So there is a bit of a bonus there. So anyway, that's where we are with that one. Expected progress on this is for the new growths to push some new roots and extend the root system. And some of those latest growths that have matured at a reasonable size with 2 good leaves should bloom. So that's where we are with that one. Now the Laelia purpurata variety atropurpurea, there's a lot of purpurs in there. This was my notorious non-bloomer, but we had finally got this to bloom on half of the plant. That's better than none. So it always produced 2 new growths through the season. It was out of season when I got it. It's kicked itself roughly back in place now. It has a certain time of year it's supposed to bloom. More importantly, it has a certain time of year to grow its new growths and mature them. That's the important bit. But anyway, we got 2 strong new growths on this, and one of them had bloomed, the growth on the right hand side with the dead stick looking out at the top of it. That's basically the old sheath. And then to the left hand side of the plant, the growth sticking up there still has its sheath. That's the one that didn't bloom. Now at this point in time, it had done its blooming thing. That green sheath was not going to bloom. That was accepted, but it was waiting for new growths. It's got 2 leads on it, so there should be, at the start of the season like this, 2 new growths starting that should push on at a rate of knots. So the expectation was 2 new growths that would mature fully and hopefully bloom on both somewhere down the line. I can't remember what time of year this blooms, but it's roughly in place where it should do now. So all I could expect this to do was start those new growths and push them on through the growing season, and get to maturity as soon as possible. Right, so on to one of the biggies now. Now last time we looked at this, it has now come into the category of finally bloomed, so we can't call it a non-bloomer anymore. Notorious non-bloomer in this one's case, but it has finally bloomed, and it bloomed on one of the 2 leads. This was the one that bloomed and the sheath died right back. This one didn't bloom and the sheath stayed green. It's not going to bloom, that's just, that will fade eventually and be gone. And last time we looked at this, we were expecting the 2 new growths on the 2 new leads, hoping they would stay in the pot so that it can get another year in the pot. And they have. We've got 1 new growth pushing out here, nice strong new growth here. Now you might think, why is it doing that? It's doing that because I'm training it with light. So I'm making sure when I put it up on the shelf that it always faces the light. Because what I didn't want is this, having decided to come out this side of this growth, I didn't want it crossing over. And also this plant leans this way. So you see I did it with this one and got it to point this way. If I do it with that one, the plant comes back into balance and doesn't topple over at a moment's notice, which it has done. So I'm just looking down. This is, when you see pale spots on a leaf like that, check the other side, because the other side is where the scale will be. Dead ones. Jolly good. But you see the damage, you know, that's permanent, that don't go away. And then our other new growth, this side, is a bit behind. So if they both bloom this time, which would be nice, they'll be nicely staggered, because they don't have a long life, the blooms on this. We're looking about 3.5 weeks, maybe 4, but certainly no more. So the two growths being staggered will produce blooms on a staggered basis if they both bloom. Now you have to sort of think about where the strength in the plant is. This side of the plant with the large new growth that didn't bloom, in theory has got bigger reserves because it didn't have to produce the blooms. Whereas this side of the plant that did produce the blooms might not have such reserves. But it's difficult to tell because this is the stronger new growth. Well, I won't say stronger, I'll say the more advanced. So this has done as expected, produced its 2 new growths, and we will be expecting those to push on, and at least one of them produce blooms. If neither of those 2 produce blooms, I'll be very disappointed. At least one of them should. Hopefully this time round, both. The plant gets bigger and stronger by 2 growths each year because it's not losing any, and it's not losing any leaves. So it's increasing its mass, and that is really what dictates to a plant whether it's got enough spare reserves to actually produce the blooms. And the bigger the mass and the storage, the better. So obviously from last year, 2 new growths, putting that much extra into the plant as far as storage and strength is concerned, used up a bit of its reserves to bloom, and now this year 2 more new growths with 2 growths that weren't there before. So it's getting its mass bigger and better all the time. So in theory there should be enough for both of those growths to bloom this time round. But one of them at least are better. Anyway, time will tell. Those both need to grow on and push hard, which is what I do. This gets a good bit of feed. I don't allow it to stay dry for any length of time. We're still in the growing season despite the days getting shorter, so we'll see where we get with that. Now the Iwanagara Apple-Blossom, this one had its rhizome cut to induce hopefully a growth farther back in the plant. And at this particular point in time it had worked. So to the right hand side, right on the edge of the pot there, you can see the new growth on the lead. That's the lead it's always had, so that's its normal progression at that time of year. But virtually dead centre in the pot is the tiniest of new growths just starting. There's a little gap in the middle of the pot. It's to the left at the base of that pseudo-bulb. Well, difficult to see. But the split in the rhizome had actually worked. So basically on this particular plant I was expecting the right hand new growth to just get up to maturity and bloom as it always has done, and the new growth to at least get to maturity. Whether it was going to bloom or not was debatable. There's not much root activity at the end of the plant, so we'll see how it got on. Well, the plans for the apple blossom through the growing season were to grow. Last time we looked, we had the lead it's always had pushing on its new growth out to the right hand side of the plant, and where the rhizome had been nicked we had a secondary growth pushing out farther back in the plant, and that had just literally started. That was about a centimetre long at the base of the plant, so it was just a twinkle. But obviously through the growing season the main lead has pushed on a nice strong new growth which now has a sheath, so that's not too far off blooming, I wouldn't think, or at least producing the buds. These are strange because sometimes they'll actually produce the buds straight out of the top of the plant and not even bother with a sheath. and other times it produces quite a good sheath and then the buds come. But either way, the buds come. So the sheath is not really relevant, it just does its own thing. The other growth came up parallel with the one in front of it. So from the front of the plant you can't even see it, but this is not such a strong growth. It may or may not bloom, but certainly the next one on this now new lead will bloom. So at least we've got that second lead now, albeit in the middle of the plant. And as such, this lead has so far produced 0 roots. I suspect it will, and this lead here hasn't produced any roots. And I think I'm forming a pattern in my mind with this one. The new growths actually mature completely, and then the roots start being produced from the previous bulb and creep forward. So anyway, what we should get on this in the not too distant future is blooms out on that right hand growth, which is, I mean, if you look at the growths before, this was before 2 leaves, this one 2 leaves, this one 2 leaves, this one's got 3, so it's getting stronger. Yeah, all the bulbs on here have only ever had 2 leaves. Now we've got 3 on one. So the bulbs, again, it's another one of those that the overall plant is gaining strength. We've only got 1 leafless bulb here, which is the oldest bulb. Everything else has retained its leaves, albeit that the older part of the plant does have some pretty tatty leaves on it, but they're still green and they still work. So yeah, the plant's gaining strength. The latest 2 growths are capable of getting all of their roots in the pot. Yeah, I mean, some of them will come out through holes, some of them may even come out over the top and down the side, but either way there'll be new roots down in the media, so that will all help. So blooms to come in the not too distant future on this one, and possibly a weak spike on the new lead. I've got a horrible feeling that one may be blind, but who knows? These Cattleya types can produce surprises. Now this one's a little bit of an exception in my collection because I know very little about it and I don't want to. It was a raffle prize from Milan, or he brought it into the raffle, and I won it basically. I know very little about it apart from the fact its temperature range should be okay in my grow room. So all I could expect from this is for it to grow, because I don't want to know about when it blooms, how it blooms, all that sort of stuff. This is just going to be a surprise, and I'm pleased to let it be that way. But at the start of the season we had a new growth out to the right, pushing on, leaves just opening, and then just to the right of that, at the base of the plant, a new growth just starting, and then at the back of the plant there was actually a 3rd new growth. So it was starting the season as it ought to do, I presume, growing. Right, last time we looked at this one we had some new growths, which obviously the expectation in the growing season is for those new growths to push on and mature. You can't really expect anything else. I haven't got a clue if or when this is going to bloom or where it will bloom from, and I don't want to know. As I said, when I got this it was a raffle prize, therefore it is totally unknown to me. I'd never heard of it. I don't know anything about it apart from basic temperature range, that sort of thing, and it should grow okay here, which it is. But I don't want to know when it blooms or where it blooms from. I want it to be a surprise. You know, it's all very well knowing exactly what your plants are supposed to do, but sometimes it's just nice to have something unexpected, perhaps. So what we had was this growth here was pushing on about that long. Now that's obviously maturing nicely. The little one that had just started here is still pushing on, and the very small one at the back is also pushing on. All these canes, I believe, are still growing, possibly with the exception of the tallest one. Yeah, I think the tallest one may have produced its last leaf. But again, I don't know. You know, that's when this one is growing, it's difficult to work out whether you've just got the next leaf coming out or a terminal leaf coming out, because they look the same. The difference is when it's a terminal leaf, it stops growing. Anyway, this is sort of doing okay. I won't say it's romping ahead, because it isn't. but it's pushed some new growths out, all with good leaves. And I'm going to say this one here that's heading for maturity, if it's not mature, should get a bit thicker, but it's got a good set of leaves on it. If anything's going to bloom on this plant, it's probably going to be that particular cane. But it's a wait and see. But I'm pleased, it's progressing, it's doing okay. It could do with some more roots, I must admit, but it has grown some. But it's not a good root system yet. We shall see what happens. Now, in amongst this set, this is my problem plant. It's never grown well for me since I got it, basically, and it's proceeding in its accepted manner. It's not growing well. Not a happy bunny, but at the start of the season it was producing some new growths. At this stage they were tiny, a job to even see them, but nonetheless it was starting a few new growths in various places. There's one off to the left hand side of the pot right against the rim, and then a little bit farther into the pot there's another tiny one pushing up, and there was some round the other side as well. But not a happy bunny. I'd had to take off a couple of rotten pseudo bulbs that had actually started to go soggy, so they had to come off immediately. So it was in a state of scrutiny to see what was going to happen next, as there was another bulb that was a dark brown colour but still firm and solid. And at the time I was reluctant to take it off because I'd have taken out at least one new growth by doing so. So I thought we'll leave it for a bit and see how it gets on. But you know, all I could do was hope that the new growth pushed on and put some strength back into the plant. Okay, so this is the troublesome one in the group, the one that has worry written all over it. And what's more worrying when you get that is when you don't know the reasons. So reasons unknown. It's not growing as well as it should, and it hasn't grown as well as it should for a very, very long time. So it's on borrowed time, as the expression goes. It needs to either pick up and start getting some strength back into it, or it's going to go. But we had little tiny new growth here and another one here when we last looked. Those are growing on. They're not strong growths though, but they've hung in there, that's the main thing. And then at the other end of the plant we had this tiny one buried in the bark that is desperately trying to grow but not really succeeding. And then we had this one here that's sort of trying to grow, getting tangled up with the other one. And then the other one here. Now all of them are trying to grow, but they're not doing it very well, and they don't seem to be producing masses of new roots. Now what we have got is an absolutely rotten pseudo bulb right in the middle of the plant that is shriveling dramatically, and it's rock hard, so it can shrivel away to its heart's content. But first sign of sogginess, that section of the plant will have to come off. But then now we've got a new bulb getting a similar horrible patch on it. It's not soggy, it's solid, but it's brown and it shouldn't be. So this plant is not right. So as far as progression from now on is concerned, that's got to be monitored closely because it's relatively new. Yeah. Now I suspect it's going to spread to the whole bulb, and it will be exactly like this one. It'll drop its leaves and then eventually shrivel, and it will be gone because it will just pull off at that point. Yeah. Don't know why it's doing it, but it is. And it's not rapid, it's relatively slow. And then the new growths should push on, they should form bulbs, and they should, at least one or two of them, bloom. But given how weak the whole plant is as a whole, I'm not sure I'm going to get blooms on these growths. But all I can do is wait and see and keep a close eye on this plant that is not happy. Difficult to work out why. I've got no answers. I mean, it was potted in a media that was totally unsuitable, and it lost its roots, and it nearly got thrown out at that point. But I put it in a holy clay pot with large bark, and it produced a root system. And I thought, oh, that's what was wrong. Now it'll grow. But it's sort of grows in fits and starts. It's not growing anywhere near as well as it should. So come next time it might not even be here. But at the moment new growths are sort of pushing on, and I'm monitoring a couple of bulbs, so we'll go from there. Now this little cross is a very popular one because of its blooms. They're just a lovely set of colours that work well together. So when it blooms, it's popular. The blooms last a reasonable amount of time as well. Now there's two leads going on this plant, but one of them is not. It was unexpected and not right. The back end of the plant produced two pseudo bulbs out of the blue. Basically, I didn't cut rhizomes or do anything to trigger them, and they didn't grow properly, but one of them did actually manage to bloom. But this plant is okay. It grows in a strange manner. I'll go over that in the next bit. But at this particular point in time, although they're not very clear to see, there was two new growths, one pushing on and one just starting. And root system on this one fades and then effectively replaces itself with the new growths at some point during their progression. So it's a strange one in its activity, but nonetheless it's become a reliable bloomer and even managed to bloom on a like a half-size pseudo bulb that popped out from absolutely nowhere. So it's okay. I won't say it's a brilliant Cattleya, but it's compact, it blooms and it grows. Now this one behaves strangely, which is often the way with bifoliates. They're more finicky than the single-leafed Cattleya hybrids, they just are. They're more inclined to go down at a repot than the others as well. We need to get the timing right. Getting the timing right on this one is quite difficult because it doesn't behave itself. What we've got is we had a very strange occurrence at the back end of this plant where it produced a couple of very tiny little bulbs, but it was the back of the plant. So I wasn't expecting any growth there at all. One of them even managed to bloom, the other one is just tiny, just never got going. But because it started growing at this point of the plant, it pushed up this one, which is coming from that base area, and it's gone right up in the middle of the plant. So that is more like, you know, going to be full size. And then the normal lead for the plant is this area, and this is the latest, and very bad scale damage on this, distorted a leaf, got at it when it was young and left patches, but it's got a sheath, it's going to bloom nonetheless. And now you can see, you know, the differences that you get. This one, the growth is virtually mature, it's producing its sheath, and it's only now decided to start producing some new roots. And the roots on this are strange because the old ones fade badly. You know, I mean, that is effectively dead. But it replaces them each year with a good set. So at this particular point in time, the roots look awful. But, you know, in a couple of months' time, they'll look good again, because all the new roots will be from towards the middle of the pot, so they'll all spread outwards over the top of these old ones. So it will get going again, and it's been doing that a while now. So we should get blooms here soon, and I'm highly expecting a reasonable blooming on this growth as well. And I've now got two leads on the plant. So it's not the best looking plant, but it does have some of the best looking blooms. It's very popular, this one, when it blooms. And so far it's bloomed on every new growth successfully, so I don't see why it shouldn't now, even though it's not the best of best looking plant. So there we go, that's that. Okay, so that was part 3, the Cattleya Alliance. At least one in there probably not recognisable as a Cattleya type, but it's in the Alliance, and a bit of variety in there as well. So that's those. That leaves part 4 to go, and that's the selection of cooler, shadier types. So there's quite a few different types of orchids in that set, because it's more about an environmental set rather than particular genera, if you see what I mean. So I'll get on with that later in the week. Hope you've enjoyed this. Again, if you're watching and you're not subscribed, please think about doing so. It doesn't cost the earth. In fact, it costs zero, zilch, absolutely nothing, but it does help the channel a lot and help me get towards that 10k mark, which is, it's creeping there. We're getting there. I reckon certainly by the end of next month we should be there, which will be brilliant. I've been looking forward to this for so long. So if you're not subscribed, think about doing so, please. And if you've already done it, well, thanks a bunch. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.